The session, Industry Diversification, Defense Meets Automotive, is sponsored by Kettering University. Please welcome Chief Operating Officer of the Detroit Regional Chamber, Tammy Carnrike. Director of Next Generation Combat Vehicle for the United States Army Futures Command, Brigadier General Ross Coffman. President and Chief Executive Officer of Safety Technology Holdings and Humanetics Innovation Solutions, Christopher O'Connor. And to moderate the discussion, please welcome back to the stage, John McElroy.
This is a panel I'm really looking forward to. It's going to be Defense Meets Automotive. And General, I'm just going to start with you. Let's jump right into it. From your vantage point, what would you like to see the automotive industry doing with the U.S. Army and other branches of the military?
Yeah, so back in history, we all know that here in Detroit, the automotive industry was paramount in preparing us for World War II and keeping us in the fight. That has significantly dropped off. And I'd like to see not even a double, but some multiple of 10 more involvement from the automotive industry with really the government here in Detroit, as well as writ large.
Tammy, I didn't even know that you were involved with the military in any way, and I got to read it here. Civilian aide to the Secretary of the Army for Michigan. What's that mean, and what do you do?
So, well, first of all, you need to know every state has at least one civilian aide. Some of the larger states have more, and the role of the civilian aide is really to be the eyes and the ears in the state for the Army, to report anything that needs to be known. But also for me to do what the Army needs to be done across the nation, telling a story, helping with recruitment, looking for new opportunities for the Army with new connections or partnerships, or in general, just greater awareness of all that's happening, which is, kind of how this whole discussion for me has become really relevant.
Okay, we're going to dig down into that in a minute, but we got to talk to Chris over here because it's very interesting to me. You're the CEO of a company called Humanetics. As my understanding is, you guys are the world supplier of crash test dummies for automotive, or certainly one of the largest. What's your connection with the military?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, John. So Humanetics is not a household name, but certainly everybody knows our products. And we are the original designer, develop, market leader in crash test dummies of every size and shape for the world. And we also do a lot of technology that's in those. So all the custom sensors, there's as many as 150 sensors in the most advanced crash test dummies now. But we also do blast dummies for the military. We do a lot of injury work associated with that. We do custom sensors. We do custom fiber work for controllers for helicopters, to gyro fiber that we make for aircraft and autonomous vehicles, for that matter.
How'd you get involved in being with the military?
I'm actually a military myself. I didn't come into uniform. I wouldn't look as good as the general here, but I spent 35 years in the Army and also in the Army Reserve, so I have a real keen interest. Crash test dummies to us are a metric we live by of saving lives and trying to make a difference. So our introduction into the military and trying to work and developing products to help with IEDs and injuries for military applicants was near and dear to our background.
So you as CEO initiated this for your company?
Well, actually, if I look back the history of Humanetics and I trace the lineage back 65 years, I think we've got a mic problem here. Check one. If you look back on the history for 65 years, actually Humanetics started with aircraft ejection seats. So actually you could say some of our the original products we had were military based.
Okay, I'm back online. General, you mentioned that you'd like to see more of a connection between the automotive industry, domestic automotive industry, and the military. Do you have like a list of where you'd like to start, things where you think that this action could first start to take place?
Yeah, so as of today, the characteristics for the new vehicle that will replace the Bradley fighting vehicle will hit the web. And the approach we're taking is twofold. One is vehicle manufacturers can can compete in that space and provide feedback to build the whole vehicle. Also, anyone that has a enabling technology. So this thing is going to have autonomous capabilities. It's got sensors. It's got seats. It's got automotive parts that you can imagine. We're looking for companies to reach out and compete in that space as well. One of the things when I stood this team up about 18 months ago that shocked me was that people want to work with the government, but they don't know how. Right? And so what used to be called FedBiz Ops website and is now called SAMS, that's where all military contracts hit. And that's a space. But what I'd really like coming out of today is if there's an interest, please reach out. Ross Coffman, right on, let's just go LinkedIn. Okay, you can go there. But if you want to have a conversation, our answer is very simple, yes.
Tammy, you said your eyes and ears for the Army. What are you hearing from the Army of what it'd like to do, and are you hearing anything from Automotive of how it would like to get involved in the military?
Yeah, I hear both sides. So from what I hear from the Army, because of my role, I'm close to, the modernization strategy, the new opportunities for the future. Most people don't understand the U.S. Army is like a very large corporation. They run themselves like business does. And they're right now examining everything and the way they do things and how they do it differently in the future. So I've learned that piece as well as what the whole future of the vehicles and other types of technology and innovation the Army needs to protect its soldiers, to house their soldiers, to dress their soldiers, equip the soldiers. And then bringing in my chamber job and understanding our business community, and now obviously through our MICHauto program, what I've learned about autonomous tanks and the activity that's going to happen in the Army and what I know about our automotive industry, there's such opportunity for cross-pollination. And I would add to that aerospace, too. I think it's defense, automotive, and aerospace. And it's something that we're going to start talking about a lot louder and trying to bring them together.
Chris, one of the things I hear suppliers especially say is the paperwork that you got to go through with the car companies is horrific. With the military, it's even worse. Is that true? And what kind of lessons learned would you share with the audience of how to become a supplier to the Army?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm not even sure the answer to that, because it's challenging in terms of identifying what the need is and also how to supply that product and then how to be competitive against the other players who are in there. So I think the website is certainly the right place to look. I think if we can identify points maybe of having more industry events or conferences where both the military and the civilian side can connect on technology, I think that would be helpful. Because I think a lot of it needs to come from inside the military to identify the technology and be able to pull it in and say, I want that. Sometimes you're not identified through some of the big multi-billion-dollar military contractors to be able to identify a small company in Michigan who has a leading-edge technology that might actually be useful. So the question of trying to identify how those come together, I think, is really something that I'd like to see continue for workshops and industry events within Michigan.
Can I add something to that? So again, because of my role, the Army is very focused right now in making it very loud that they want more business done with small business, more innovative firms with the flexibility to be able to move quickly. So there is opportunities that are coming, and I think it's been recognized, but what I would point out, like General Coffman said, talk to him. I have to give a report every 6 months to the Secretary of the Army. And one of the things I have to tell him is, what are the things that the Secretary should know that you're hearing? So at any time, too, for me to hear this more about the need for small business technology opportunities, I know there's been efforts to do that at AUSA to bring more innovation technology companies. So I'm always happy to put that word in also.
General, I like what Chris is saying about maybe more conferences, things like that, because I hate to come back to the mundane part of it. But becoming qualified as a supplier is a royal pain in the neck. Moreover, because there's national security implications, if you have, and we just had a panel on diversity and inclusion, including people that were not born in the US who may not even be US citizens. That's a problem if you're trying to become a supplier to the US industry. Where I've been to places, military suppliers who are dealing with the military, one of the first questions as you sign in at the office, are you a US citizen or not? And if you're not, boy, you're walled off from places that you can go even in that building. How do you deal with these things, or is it just part of the process that you're going to have to go through?
So look, it's the United States government, right? I mean, there are some rules and there's some regulations and there are really some statutes that we have to follow. But what the Army is committed to do is help those that are interested through that process. We're not going to change that process. That is not in the immediate future. But if you have a good idea, regardless of where you're born, or any other descriptor, we want to get the best equipment in the hands of your soldiers, right? With your taxpayer money. That's what we want.
And the military has this great opportunity of using commercial off-the-shelf, available parts. So the question really is trying to get that linkage from a need to try to identify commercial parts so they can get faster use, quicker, and not have to develop something from scratch. And I think that's a key initiative as well.
Any corporation, any company, small or large, interested in certainly one thing, making money. How do they make money at this, Tammy? I mean, I did the math earlier. General Motors builds 36,000 vehicles every single workday, globally. Mm-hmm. I mean, that is the kind of volume that it needs to be able to make money. How do you explain to a GM, and I know there's a GM defense division now, mm-hmm. Well, how do you get them to focus on much smaller volume, much longer cycles that it'll be in production as well?
Yeah, I think that's going to become part of their own culture change and strategy change to do that, because it has been traditional and their approach has been. What I think larger OEMs will learn is the flexibility, the investment behind these small startups. And they're going to be able to deliver more and probably do it in a much better price component. That's going to force, I think, the larger OEMs to have to look at that particular style and change their ways.
Chris, how did you do it at Humanetics? I mean, making crash test dummies is not a mass production business, no. I can't believe. So maybe it was easier for you, but how did you identify parts of your business that you went, this is going to be perfect to take to the military?
Yeah, well, we specialize in that size. So units that are, sometimes even ones or tens or 100 or 1,000 is where we've specialized in. Crash test dummies, it sounds very iconic and popular, but there's really only 100 sold in any one year, and we sell to the entire world. 80% of our business is sold outside the US, so it's actually fairly international. So I think you create a business environment where you learn how to be competitive in there. And I would suggest that the large tier ones and the major OEMs certainly know how to build smaller volume runs. They've done a great job of running small specialty vehicles, and I would suspect they would be able to do the same thing to be able to adjust to those levels of volumes that are required.
General, you mentioned this Bradley replacement vehicle. Standing back and looking at the bigger field, what do you see as opportunities?
So, as Tammy said, there's anything that probably you touch in your company exists in the Army. I mean, we have hospitals, we have postal detachments, we have, anything that there's probably a way. There may be some niche market out there that we don't touch, but, it's huge. It's your government. So just in 30 seconds or less, the Army is so focused on modernizing that they stood up Army Futures Command, a 4-star headquarters in Austin, Texas. And then they took 1-stars like myself and they put them at the epicenter of innovation for that space. So I'm the vehicle guy. There's someone looks just like me, only slightly better looking in Huntsville, Georgia. He's the helicopter person. Someone working on the synthetic training environment, and they were down in Orlando where the gaming industry is big. So we think we've done a good job of placing the low-level general officers in the right position. And so if you have something that you think is applicable to the Army, I think the answer is it is. And we just need to connect it. And so I like the idea. More forums focused on specific spaces that reside here in Detroit. I mean, I'm a Michigander now, right? I'm a Kentucky guy, but I got here as fast as I could. And I really, I want to see Detroit, Michigan writ large, and the surrounding areas. I mean, that's why I'm here. I want to bring us all together.
You know what else I think too, John, is to the future, it has to be much more of diverse partnerships and collaboration. And so I point to the recent activity of the Army working with the Michigan State Police to start looking at how are we going to, you know, take a look at what can possibly happen and be transferred between autonomous vehicles, and how do we eliminate that or protect that from happening. So, you know, you've got the Army, you've got the automotive industry, but then you've got the Michigan State Police, you know, more partnerships, more collaboration. Be open to that.
Mm-hmm. And, yeah, I didn't. So I've got all the large robots too. So the autonomy space is huge for us here. And, you know, all the combat vehicles that we're developing, but the robots and specifically, something I found fascinating is when I traveled around my first 2 months in the job, and I met with these companies, I met a gentleman in Boston, and he goes, yeah, you know, all the early work on autonomy was funded by the government for off-road autonomy. And then now you see where we are, and you know better than I. But now it's come full circle because I'm looking for off-road autonomy again, right? And so we're really, really interested for working with you and helping this space.
Chris, expound on your ideas a bit. You know, you brought up more forums and connections. More specifically, what would you like to see in them? What do you think would yield more fruit?
Yeah, so I think, you know, if you go to the website and they're looking for an end product, it might have a lot of different technologies in it. I think if you break that down and look at what type of sensor technology do you need? I mean, we've made sensor technologies for, you know, mine sniffing robots and such that have been used by the military, right? But maybe that would get lost if you're out just looking for, you know, the end product. I'm sure there's development teams within, you know, the military also looking at specific sensors and capabilities and technologies. And so I think we've got to look at how do we break that down and see what expertise we have. Probably in this room, probably has a lot of the technologies that might make up some of this product. Maybe individually, any one may not be the one who can quote the entire, you know, build. So the question is trying to marry those up with the needs and marrying those up with maybe some tier one partners who could, you know, put the assembly and do some of the other work might be the way to think about, you know, a forum where you would discuss some of the technology that's needed and how do we put some of those pieces together. So in a sense, trying to build your best team to make something happen might be beneficial.
You know, you're triggering all three of you, all kinds of ideas in my mind as I sit here. I wonder if there's a connection with the motor racing business too. You know, very high tech, deal in very small volumes, a couple of cars in most cases. Got to have an answer right now. You know, cars got to be on the grid Sunday. There's no okay, we'll add another 6 months of development. That doesn't happen. Have you ever thought of reaching out to the motor racing community? And I know for a fact that here locally, Pratt & Miller, which does Corvette racing, and Roush Racing, has dabbled in that, but almost seems like that's maybe a great place to start.
Both Pratt & Miller and Roush are currently receiving money from the government.
Yeah, they're already there.
Had McLaren in my office this week for their digital twins, which is fascinating. So we are. The challenge becomes, I'm dealing with a 50-ton vehicle, right, that has to protect your soldiers in the worst places on earth. And that's daunting to a lot of, it's a leap. But I like what Chris said, there's a million components in there. So do you have a modular solution? Do you have the ability to, maybe it's just the wheel, but we're very interested in reducing weight. So, different types of manufacturing, things like this. But to answer your question directly, yes, but we're always interested in more.
When the general brings up autonomous large vehicles, one of the things too that does make it interesting when you try to think about how automotive and defense works together, when you think about autonomous vehicles in the automotive market and how they're built and what they need to do. A large tank doesn't drive straight down the street and then take a left turn. It goes over hills and around trees. So there's so much to be learned both ways. And I think the autonomous vehicles, to me, was one of the biggest ahas, that there's something to be gained both ways.
Yeah, as you're talking here, it seems to me maybe part of the hang up or the blockage is the auto industry can't see into the military and know everything that's going on, because I imagine if it could, you'd have companies thinking, oh, we could make that, or we could contribute to this. Chris, how did you figure out where Humanetics could go? Or did the military direct you, or did you tell them what you could do? How'd that happen?
It's a little bit of both. There's some cases, I know with some of the blast applications, we actually spent a bit of time trying to say, and work with groups to say, listen, we need to protect the soldier, because soldier survivability is really key here. There was a lot of work done, as you remember, in Afghanistan, Iraq, in protecting vehicles. But at the end of the day, we don't need a vehicle, we need the soldier to survive inside it. And actually, by reinforcing a lot of the vehicles, it actually caused more occupant injury inside the vehicle. So it's a very challenging thing, because the first reaction is let's armor everything up and this vehicle will protect everybody in it, but that's not the case. It actually did a lot of damage to occupants, and our view was warrior survivability is the #1 concern. So when we had ideas to develop what's called a WIAMIN, which is a complete military blast dummy from the ground up, because again, automotive crash is very horizontal, blast is very vertically oriented. So you get injuries from the calcaneus up through the lower body and the spine. It's a much different injury than an automotive crash. So really you have to develop a tool that will allow you to test any vehicle to find out how does that 5-star rated for a military vehicle, right? So it's a very different process. So in those cases, we try to spend a lot of time and effort, and it takes a lot of effort to try to get to the right place, and it could take years. And then there's other products where, we're talking to somebody who says, we don't know how to do something, right? We have a flight controller or something else that has to fit in this very tiny little area. It's got certain environmental requirements, and that's our specialty. So if they give us a compartment and they need to put a sensor in it, whether we use the fiber, we use the strain gauge, or some other application to look at stress, strain, pressure, temperature, or whatever is required, we can solve that problem. But the question is for them to almost find us, versus us knowing that they have a need for it. So it really comes from two different directions on the situation.
General, you mentioned at the beginning there's a website that companies can go to. Can you give that URL again?
Yeah, so it's, the key word is SAMS, S-A-M-S, and I think it's, previous was FedBiz Ops. So just Google SAMS or FedBiz Ops.
And it will come up, and what are they going to encounter at that point?
They're going to see every military contract that is out there. Like, this is what the government is asking for. And from that, in very general terms, it's not my expertise, but from that, people compete in the terms of competition are in there. And then the best in breed is selected or down selected, and then the competition continues. And each contract is different. Some is you're paid as you go. Some is, hey, you need to come with the product or the service up front. And at the end of the day, the best athlete is chosen, and that's what goes to the government, or to your soldiers.
Two other things we should talk about. One, if you checked outside, there's an exhibitor, and it's called the Bid Targeting System. And that is specifically put in place to help defense companies get more contracts, more federal contracts. And they are qualified to know that they can apply for certain contracts, and they'll even help them in writing the grant. So they're outside. That was created through MEDC in the Michigan Defense Center. The other thing we should mention is U.S. Army TACOM. And GVSC, Ground Vehicle Systems Center, formerly known as TARDEC, and the amount of procurement that takes place right there out in Warren, and General Coffman can talk to this much better than me, but billions of dollars of procurement goes out of there. There is actually a place on the TACOM website for particularly small businesses to apply to be considered as a supplier to the Army through TACOM. The PEOs that are out there are like CEOs of companies with the amount of budget that they have, and they're looking for companies to supply in many ways. So let's not also forget that treasure we have right in our backyard, over 7,500 employees and billions of dollars of procurement.
Yeah, it's what basically TACOM is the biggest auto parts store in the world. Okay, distributed. It supplies the entire United States Army's, everything from a tire to a nut to a bolt, anything. That's what TACOM does. GVSC, the Ground Vehicle Systems Center, formerly TARDEC, that is innovation, science and technology, solving problems. I work with GVSC as the requirements generator and say, look, this is what we want to do to fight and win in 2030, 2045. These are the technologies that I think we need. And then they go find them. They mature them to a technology readiness level that's acceptable, and then it's transitioned over to a program manager that then applies it to a vehicle.
General, you talked earlier about the modernization of the U.S. Army. Give us a little bit more detail on it. I don't know much about it. And as you're talking about that, if you had the opportunity to stand in front of the boards of directors and the executive leadership of the car companies and the tier 1 suppliers in town, what would you tell them?
Okay. First, look, our adversaries went to school on us, and our adversaries have been pouring a lot of money into their armies while we've been away in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's just a fact. And they watched us in Desert Storm, which I think today's the anniversary of Desert Storm. They watched us in Desert Storm. They watched us in 2003. And the power of your Army on display before the world was incredible, and what we were able to accomplish. And if you just, forget all the bullets, just the logistics of it, right? Moving that many gallons of fuel and those parts and getting people miles and miles and miles into enemy territory. I participated in both those events, and I'm telling you, incredible by your United States Army. And they said, okay, while they're away at war, we're going to modernize our fleets. So, our likely competitors on the modern day battlefield went and they're modernizing. While our fleets, which after 2003 were not used as much, right? So that's when the mine blast vehicles were used, et cetera. And our helicopters, our weapons, our infantry weapon is basically unchanged from when GM made them as an M14 for Vietnam. Okay, basically unchanged. On and on. So by standing up Army Futures Command and then taking general officers, I was in the 1st Infantry Division, and the next thing you know, I'm in Detroit, Michigan doing this. The Army has made a commitment to modernize its fleet, stem to stern, right? But doing so by saying these are our 31 signature programs. We're going to get a new weapon. We're going to get new augmented reality headsets for our soldiers, new Bradley, a new tank, robots, et cetera, et cetera. So we're putting our money where our mouth is, to do that. We've cut, billions of dollars from elsewhere in the Army and are putting it towards the modernization effort. It's a huge, huge movement. And if I had to stand in front of a CEO or a board of any company, I would say there is no more noble cause. And I understand it's all about making money. But if you're not in it to make your soldiers safer, if you're not in it to make our airmen, our Marines, if that's doesn't motivate you to get out of bed and earn that profit, I think you're looking in the wrong direction.
Real good. With that, we're going to wrap it up. General, Tammy, Chris, thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.